This is the planer. Planer is used, the main purpose of the planer is used to control thickness. So to use this machine, what we end up doing is taking and measuring the thickness of the board. And this board is 15/16 right now. So we take that, measure the thickness, and then we take and we set the gauge. Right. You can see the 1 inch mark, and then I'm going to set it so it's set at exactly at 15/16. To use this, there's a little red button here that has to be pulled out. If that's pushed in, it will not start, so pull that out. I need to turn the dust collector on. The dust collector, if it's not on, it needs to be on, because otherwise the chips stay right on top of the wood. You can see what that did to the top side. The knives in this machine are on the top of the planer. So you put that surface face down, and then it takes off and it controls the thickness all the way along. To use this machine from here, right now, it should be at 15/16. That's what it's set at. And so to use this, what I end up doing is I crank this hand wheel, take and crank it one full turn. That raises the bed of the planer up 1/16 of an inch. So now what I can do, what I do now is, what I just did is I ran it through that setting, and it was at 15/16, and now it's at 7/8 because it took us a 1/16 of an inch off. And so what I do is I just keep taking it up a 1/16 at a time. That's the maximum cut, and then just take it and get it to what I want this board to. A couple things that you probably noticed we do is that once I crank that up and start pushing it through, I used another board that was thinner, all right, something that was thinner than that to push it through with. If it gets stuck at all, we want to use a thinner board, a long enough one that we can push it through. What we want to do as far as from a safety standpoint is keep our hands, there's like an extension table on this. We want to keep our hands so it never gets up inside that extension. All right, so there's this part right here, that's kind of a safety line. We don't want to get our hands caught up in there. That's probably one of the biggest dangers that you have when using the planer. The rollers do grab. There is an arrow on the wheel itself. You can see the arrows that indicate the direction that it needs to go to crank up. Right. Other things that you'll, as far as from a safety standpoint that you'll need to know, there's a minimum length. There's 12 inches is about a minimum length on a board. That board's just a little over 12, but shorter boards are hard to get to do, and so you'll have to push another board directly behind that to get it to feed through. The other thing that you'll need to be aware of is that you glue boards together. Like this is a board that has several different boards in it that are glued together. The glue that dries on here, that hardens, we want to scrape off as much of that glue as possible because that hardens and it can chip the knives. So we want to scrape any glue off before we run it through the planer. a board doesn't happen to get stuck on you and you can't do anything else, just hit that kill switch and let it stop. Once it stops, then you can figure out which way to turn it, and it does happen on occasion. We always want to feed with the grain. So it's pretty obvious when we're feeding this board through, the grain direction runs along this way, so we're going to feed through. When the boards get closer to being square, sometimes people will run them through the opposite way and it really chips, doesn't do a very good job cutting. Something like this is 12 inches, so it's maybe just a little under 12 inches, so this may not be, it'd be very difficult to run through there. All right. So there's two rollers that it catches, and it may not catch those, but we want to make sure we always run with the grain, not across the grain. Sometimes we get some chipping occurring, like the chipping that's around this knot. All right. So if we turn that and feed it through the opposite direction, that would take care of that chipping. Because there's a knot, it'll probably chip on the other side, but sometimes we can take care of chipping that occurs by turning it around and feeding it in the opposite direction, because it just peels that, it peels it off in the way the grain is going as opposed to against the grain. There's some things that cause us to take like a half turn instead of cranking it up, full turn. We may take a half turn. If we get really hardwood, sometimes this is a piece of ash, but if it's really wide and if it's a hardwood, we might take a lighter cut off this type of wood than we would, let's say, the cedar, which is a relatively soft wood. If we want a really nice finish at the end, sometimes taking a lighter cut gives us a better quality of cut. And the last thing is the width of the board. Wide boards it's harder for the planer to cut those off, and sometimes we'll take lighter cuts on those. Last thing I want to just reiterate is, as far as how to use it, what we do is we measure the board. We set that to whatever that distance. If it was 3/4, we'd set this at 3/4. We'd run our board through. All right. We'd crank, after we ran through that setting, we'd crank it up one full turn and run it through until we got it to whatever thickness we want. Sometimes it's hard to go in, and you got to really kind of force and feed it, because it'll come in, it'll catch that in-feed roller, it'll pop it up. So you really need to show who's boss when you run boards through there. You be persistent with it. This is a planer. Its main purpose is to control thickness.